idea. Let me close some of the windows.
Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Broletic. Today we have a special guest. This is a special live stream. Joining us is Carl Zha, and we are going to be talking about China, its rise, the effect it has had on its neighbors, and U.S. efforts to contain it. Now, after this live stream, I'm going to post an edited version of this with the rest of my videos on my channel. Carl will possibly post it on his channel. So if you see it pop up again, that is the reason why YouTube separates live and regular videos. And a lot of people don't see the live unless they tuned in for it. So just to let people know that ahead of time, because I've seen comments of people say, Brian, this is a repeat. I already saw this. It's because we're trying to get around the way YouTube organizes videos. Anyway, welcome, Carl. How are you today?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for inviting me. I wanted to do this with you for a long time, ever since we actually met in Bangkok. I kind of want to talk about my trip, my impression of Thailand and Southeast Asia in general, and then we can talk about all these craziness around, Trump tariff war and how that's impacting China's neighborhood in Southeast Asia, and we can go from there. And I think some people said they want us to comment on India and Pakistan. I don't know how much we can comment on that, but maybe we can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, we can touch on it because I think it's all obviously connected. Now, Carl, you were born in China, but you were raised in the United States. I was born and raised in the United States, and then since then we have both made the decision to live our lives here in Southeast Asia. You have gone back to China. I've in the past visited China. I've traveled elsewhere here in Southeast Asia, and so it's will be an interesting conversation to compare notes as to how things have changed over the years. I have been in Asia almost my entire adult life. When I was in the U.S. Marines, I was based in Japan for almost 3 years, and then as soon as I got out of the Marines, I went straight back to Asia. I was in Thailand, Singapore. I've traveled through Malaysia, Laos, and you have been in Bali, Indonesia, but you've traveled around Indonesia, and you just came here to Thailand, where we met. And you told me the last time you were here was all the way back in, I think, 2003. And that was actually around the time I first came here. And things have changed so drastically since then. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how it was then. We can have a conversation about how it was then and the impression it made on you now.
I came actually 1 year earlier than that. I came in 2002. I went to Phuket and then the PP Island, but I also made a stopover in Bangkok. At that time, my impression of Bangkok is kind of what I expected. It's straight out of like old Vietnam War era movies, and you have I saw like rats scurrying around in the streets. And I remember 2 o'clock in the morning, I went downstairs from the apartment I was staying in to get some snacks at the 7-Eleven, and I saw elephant walking down the street. This is downtown Bangkok, so this is like not the outskirts. This was downtown Bangkok. So imagine my surprise coming back 23 years later, and I saw so much development. I mean, Bangkok has really cleaned up. Bangkok has a very nice, clean, efficient metro system, which I took to meet you. I took a picture. I noted how not only they were new, but all the trains that have protected barriers. So you can't push people onto the train tracks like they do in New York. And the floor is immaculate. And people are polite. People, I mean, compared to US, especially, Thai people are super polite. It's just nice. I mean, everything is just nice. And we met in a mall actually, and the mall is just like a mall everywhere, but it's full of consumer goods. There's signs of a burgeoning middle class everywhere. We also check out the BYD showroom in the mall because I wanted to compare prices, how much they're selling in Bali versus Bangkok. but yeah, and there was and we came across these a boys band playing to like crowds of teenage girls, so this is kind of like the same across the world, but it's it's still quite different from Thailand 23 years ago when I first visited. Back then, Thailand was still developing, but now, I would say, Thailand is quite, I mean, in terms of infrastructure, in many ways, already surpassed the United States, especially in Bangkok. And like everything is so convenient. I was walking like in the CPD district, kind of like very heart of Bangkok. I'm just, looking for food in the morning, and around like 6 o'clock in the morning, they will have like food vendors lining up on the street. They were packing up like bento boxes for office workers who are coming in. The food is really cheap. They're really good, but all of them have a QR code you can scan. So you just do mobile payment. Like all these street food vendors have QR code. You just scan and then you pay. And before I only saw that in China, but this is prevalent in Southeast Asia now, also in Indonesia. And which we can maybe talk about the Trump tariff, because it turns out the details of the Indonesian trade negotiation with United States have been leaked. One thing that US didn't like is actually those localized QR code mobile payment system in Southeast Asia. They specifically said, the Indonesian mobile payment system, it benefits the local vendors, and they want Indonesia to get rid of that and replace it with switch to the MasterCard and Visa system. I mean, this is not about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. This is just about financial domination, like what they always try to do. But what I have, and another thing I saw about Thailand, immediately after I left the Bangkok airport, I saw like 4 or 5 giant billboards advertising cars, car ads. And all of them are Chinese, like Chinese brands that people back home in US never heard of, the Great Wall Motors. They may have heard of BYD, but there's a Deepal, there's MG. Oh, they may have MG because he was a British brand and then bought out. But anyway, the thing is, there's so much more options available now to the Thai consumers, and there's definitely a large a middle class. Like during the trade talks, people in Washington, like the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he will say something like, they need us because we have the money. They need us to spend to buy their goods. Like, no, man. People in Asia, they're getting wealthier and wealthier. They can afford their own goods. They can afford the product they themselves make. So that's my initial impression of Thailand. I was very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and I have been here since 2003, and I think the first time I came here was around 2002. That was with the military. When I actually moved here was 2003, 2004. And yes, Bangkok was, I think it was convenient. It was comfortable, but it's certainly, when you compare then to now, it's made a quantum leap. And yes, there were literally elephants walking in the streets. People would bring the elephants into the city, and they would go around to tourists and get them to buy food to feed to the elephants. And all of that has been gradually phased out. I saw a comment in the comment section talking about kind of the seedier types of tourism that Thailand has a reputation for. This has been gradually in decline for many years. And if you were to come here and look for it now, you'd be very disappointed. It has shrunk to just like 1 or 2 streets in the big city. And yet these island places where a lot of Western tourists go, it's because it caters to mainly Western tourists. And Western tourists have been in severe decline over the years. The largest amount of tourists come from China, more than all Western countries combined. And then the next largest group after Chinese tourists are tourists from the rest of Southeast Asia. And you could see that the signs used to be in English and Japanese, and now you see more signs in Mandarin, but also Russian, because I think the largest group of, I guess you could categorize them as Westerners, is actually from Russia, not Europe, not the United States. So there's been a shift in that. And a lot of people have a misconception that Thailand is a tourist country. It depends on tourism. Carl, you were saying how Scott Bessent is saying they need us, they need our money. A lot of Western tourists come here and they strut down the street. They think they could do anything they want. And when people are like, what are you doing? You can't do that. And they said, if it wasn't for me, you would all be in the jungle digging for bugs in the ground to eat. And it's like, no, like Carl, you saw the mall that we met at. I'm not going to say where it was because we're both on all kinds of lists, but it was way outside of Bangkok. It's not even technically Bangkok. It was another province. The urban sprawl reached there. It was, I would say, suburbs. You were talking about a burgeoning middle class. As you leave the city, you can, well, in the city, you have these huge condominiums that people in the middle class working in the city are living in with their families. And also housing developments, all as you leave the city and you're in the suburbs. And so this was a huge shopping mall. It's not even in Bangkok. Some people say, well, that's the capital, so that's the reason why. But you could find places like this in the city center of every province, everywhere you go. So there's been a huge change. But Carl, my next question to you is, if it wasn't for the rise of China, do you think the United States and Europe would have helped Thailand and the rest of Southeast Asia develop in this way? Do you think this is because of America's benevolent grace that Southeast Asia has risen, or is this because it has risen together with China?
Well, I mean, you mentioned that kind of the superior attitude of Western tourists in Southeast Asia, and you mentioned about like the seedier side of tourism. That actually started with U.S. military. Start during the Vietnam War, because at that time the American GIs, they will take their R&R to places like Bangkok, and that's when like the sex tourism industry really started. It was started to cater the American GIs, on their vacation away from Vietnam, and that's kind of like the stereotypical image of Thailand in like the Western imagination. But what China has done, what the rise of China has done is, first you made a lot of consumer goods readily available. For example, here in Bali, our babysitter, she has an Oppo phone, and like before China come to the scene, smartphone was not affordable. It was not affordable to many people in Southeast Asia. It's China and the Chinese brands that made these smartphones kind of like the common household items. And now every teenage girl can have a smartphone, have an Oppo or Vivo. And I imagine similar process was happening in Thailand as well. And also the amount of infrastructure that I saw, the infrastructure development I saw. I know Thailand currently they're in talks about building a high-speed rail to join up with the China-Lao railway, and
it's under construction already. Just so, yes, to update it.
And that will enable that's basically kind of the Pan-Asian rail network dream that has been in existence for a long time. The idea is you would be able to take a train in China, travel all the way through Southeast Asia, to Bangkok, and eventually even to Singapore. And that dream is coming to fruition right now, as China is investing in many of these countries in developing their infrastructure. Most notably the China-Laos railway that's already on the border of Thailand, and it's already connecting with like the existing rail system of Thailand. But now Thailand is upgrading it to a high-speed rail. So one day you can take a high-speed rail from Bangkok out to the Laotian border, and the cars, like I mentioned, I saw maybe 1 or 2 Teslas in Bangkok, but I saw so many Chinese EVs. And this is, again, it's because the Chinese car manufacturers have made EVs affordable. EV is no longer like like a luxury item. It's not something that's more expensive than gas cars. And I was actually jealous because we don't get as many models in Bali than you guys do in Bangkok. You have all the Chinese car manufacturer there. BYD opened a factory there in Thailand. Because Thailand is kind of the auto manufacturer center of Southeast Asia. A lot of Americans would know this because they only know Thailand for like sex tourism. They didn't know that Thailand have a burgeoning auto industry, or like they're moving up the value chain now. They're talking about manufacturing chips and stuff like that. And this is everywhere I travel in Southeast Asia, Thailand. I've been to Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. Everywhere is booming. I like to say the Asia century is already here. You can see the results all around you. I highly encourage people from North America, whether you're in Canada or US, come travel, come to see Southeast Asia. Many other people from the rest of the world do. On my plane from Bali, there was a Kuwaiti couple that was sitting next to me, and they just finished their vacation in Bali, and they decided to spend a couple of days in Bangkok. I asked him, "Oh, why did you choose Bangkok?" And the guy said, "Oh, I love it. Because Bali is still like kind of the place you experience nature and culture. Bangkok is a modern city, where we can do a lot of shopping. They spend 2 days. They allotted 2 days just to go shopping in Bangkok. It's a happening place. People, because the physical location is pretty far from the U.S. mainland, so not many people are aware of it. But for many people in Asia, in particular, they already know Bangkok is a happening place. And I just find out Pepe Escobar actually has a place in Bangkok. I didn't even know that. He was kind of partially based out there because he started his career, I guess, for writing for Asia Times, which was a newspaper based out of Bangkok, Thailand.
Yes. So a couple of things that you were talking about. I have noticed larger and larger numbers of Chinese manufactured cars on the road here. Obviously, when I first got here, it was Japanese cars. And then you saw a large number of American cars, because not because they were importing them from America. And I remember there was an auto manufacturing crisis in the US, and then there was the car bailout. And I remember warning people, family back in the US, because they were talking about, oh, we're not going to close these factories in the US. But I saw them building the factory here. I'm like, of course they're going to close it there because they're moving it here. And then they did. And over the years, you saw Japanese, American cars, and then suddenly you started noticing MG, and then the Chinese electric vehicles. And now you see them absolutely everywhere. And there's charging stations absolutely everywhere. And it's not just a huge shift, but it's happening very, very rapidly, much faster than change has occurred over the entire period that I've been here. And I think that's part of, because the acceleration of China's rise, but also the acceleration of technological research development. So there's a lot of these things coming into play. Mobile phones, exactly, like there's so many people here now. I use Huawei. I still use Huawei. I've learned to live without Google being on my smartphone. A lot of people have Xiaomi. This is an extremely popular smartphone.
I have Xiaomi.
And there you go. And they're as capable, if not more so, than Apple, and they're so much cheaper. And so it's a lot of people still get Apple phones here, iPhones here. It's more like a status symbol than any sense, of any form of practicality. And that's what Western products really have been reduced to. They're a status symbol for people, but in terms of practicality, improving the everyday life of people here in this country and in the region, it is the rise of Chinese manufacturing, the overcapacity, as the US calls it. I would call it abundance, and it has materially improved the lives of everybody here. I'm trying to think of. Oh, you were talking about infrastructure here. I talk to my brothers back in the United States often, and he's always going through areas where there's no coverage, and he complains about how expensive his monthly bills are for telecommunications, and we compare notes about what I'm paying, what he's paying. My wife has like all of these different plans, and even you add all of them up, it's still less than what he's paying for just one plan. And why? Why is that? Does telecommunication just for some reason cost more in the US? Or is it because there's two completely different systems at play here? And I wanted to ask you about a little bit more. We're talking about Thailand, but you're in Bali and Indonesia, and you've traveled around there. How have you seen developments improve there? And aren't there Chinese joint Indonesian-Chinese infrastructure projects there, and what's the impact been of those?
Actually, there is a power plant north of Bali that's been built by China. That's providing electricity on the island. So I mean, and all the right now we are live over the internet is because Huawei built out 4G network here. They already have 5G in the city center, Denpasar, but I live out in the boondocks, so I don't get 5G. I only get 4G. And because I live in the jungle, we are the first, like only third houses in the whole area. So like the electric company, they don't build lines for like the cables for internet. So I had to basically rely on like similar to mobile data, but still working. We are still talking, and this is because of Huawei. And and now a lot of Chinese company are coming to Indonesia they're investing in nickel mines, because traditionally Indonesia serve as a raw commodity producer. It exports raw commodity and receive manufactured goods. So what Indonesian government is trying to do, they're trying to encourage local manufacturing. They banned the export of Indonesian nickel. So now a lot of Chinese investors are coming in to set up refineries in Indonesia to refine nickel locally, because nickel is used in the in the lithium ion batteries for EVs, for example. So that's a very important critical resource. So there's tons of Chinese investment around that, and this is the thing. U.S. is trying to force countries in Southeast Asia to pick a side. It's you're either with us or against us. But they're really trying to want them to pivot away from China. But U.S. is not offering alternative, right? U.S. is not saying, here, take a shitload of money. Here, take this bag of money. This will be your compensation for cutting off China. But no, United States is not doing that. Instead, they slap tariffs. They just say, okay, if you do what I say, I'll think about scaling back the tariff. It's all stick, no carrots. This is why Xi Jinping recently was touring through Southeast Asia, and he was getting red carpet treatment. And not only that, ASEAN, which is an organization of all Southeast Asian countries, recently their trade representative met with a trade representative from China, Japan, and South Korea. And they just made an announcement. They're going to form like the biggest free trade bloc. And they made a joint statement condemning Trump tariff, and they're opposed any unilateralism. And they place emphasis on. So by the way, this is huge, because if you look at China has 1.4 billion people, Southeast Asia has somewhere around 680 million people. Japan has like more than 100 million people, and Korea has 50 million people. So altogether, you have more than 2 billion people living in this zone. This is new free trade zone. This is a giant economic bloc, and East Asia is already where most of the economic activities are in terms of global trade. So, but by the way, this is also another reason why United States want to insert itself into stuff like the South China Sea dispute, because they will say, oh, we're here to guarantee a free and open Indo-Pacific. We're here to safeguard the vital trade lane. But they don't tell people the vital trade lane. It's where 80% of the traffic is to and from China. And so essentially, U.S. Navy's claim is they're in South China Sea to guard this vital sea lane of China from China, which is completely ridiculous, right? And this region is going to be even more tightly integrated with the Chinese supply chain, because a lot of the as China's economy is moving up the value chain, they're also shedding a lot of more labor-intensive industry like textile, and they're moving to Southeast Asia like Vietnam, Indonesia, etc. And also this is also accelerated by the U.S. push for decoupling from China. So a lot of the Chinese factory, as well as foreign multinational, they're moving their supply chains to places like Vietnam. But the reason they chose Vietnam is precisely because it's proximity to China, because it's very easy to access the Chinese supply chain. So in essence, the Chinese supply chain just expanded to the rest of Southeast Asia. All these factories, they still depend on China for machine tools, for parts. This is why it makes sense to move to, say, Vietnam, or rather than say India, because Vietnam will be a lot closer. But one of the result of the, by the way, you talk about iPhone is still made in China. 80% of iPhone is still made in China, and only the Americans they're going to get a different version, because Tim Cook said, okay, well, to satisfy the tariff, we're going to move just enough production to India, so the Americans will get a special made in India iPhone. The rest of the world will continue to get regular iPhone made in China. And this is the same for many Western brands, even luxury brands. So what people are really paying when they buy Western brands, you're paying for the brand and marketing, right? It's still made in China. Everything is still made in China by Chinese labor in Chinese factory. It's like they just slap a Western brand on it and you paying a huge premium. Chinese make about $60 on every iPhone produced, right? Majority of the profit is being captured by Apple, because the Apple brand. So a lot of people are now starting to wake up to that fact. They're seeing the videos on TikTok where they show all these luxury bags, all those Louis Vuitton bags. They're mostly made in China. They just slap the European luxury brand on it, and certainly they have to pay top dollars for it. So this is the world we are. When you're paying goods, you're paying either made in China goods with Chinese brand, which is a lot cheaper, or you're paying for made in China goods with the Western brand, which you pay shit tons of more premium for.
All very good points. The point of moving manufacturing to Southeast Asia, but still relying on supply chains emanating out of China. I wanted, because now we're moving into U.S. versus China territory, and I just wanted to make one more comment about the cost of living. I have family back in the U.S. Carl, I'm sure you know plenty of people back in the U.S. The cost of living is spiraling out of control there. Here, every day I realize how lucky I am. The cost of living is so low here. Everything is so affordable. I'm not Thai, so I'm not covered by Thai universal healthcare. Thai people are, the rest of my family here is covered by that. But if I have to go to the hospital for something and I have to pay out of my pocket for it, I could still afford it. There are things that we have had to pay for at the hospital out of pocket that if this happened in the US, I would be living under a bridge and fighting with a stray dog for my dinner. So just that alone, it should be a wake-up call. But a lot of Americans, they don't understand this. They think whatever's happening in the US is happening everywhere, and they're the lucky ones, and everyone else is living under even worse conditions. The image that they have in their head of Southeast Asia is very different Sure.
I want to add on to that, because because kind of now I think about healthcare in the U.S. My mom still lives in North Carolina, and her doctor just told her it seems like her bladder is like dripping or something. They told her to get a scan, right? Like they told her to get a scan, and so she tried to sign up for scan, and it's like 3 months. She has to wait 3 months just to get a scan and to get a test. Whereas here, I just recently, because I am covered because through my wife, I'm covered by local insurance. So recently, I had a minor surf accident. I got caught in a really big wave, and the wave slammed the board really hard against my head, and I had a minor concussion. And so I was a little bit worried. So I wanted to, they told me, okay, just get a scan, just in case. Get a scan of your brain, making sure everything is okay. I walked in and got done. The same day, not the same day, just like a couple hours later, it's done. I mean, and I paid nothing. It was all covered by insurance. I mean, that's amazing. This thing does not happen in the United States. And also I used to make decent money working IT back in the US, but still I was not able to afford a house in LA because it was just out of my reach. I just would not be able to afford a house by myself, at least in the neighborhood I want to live in. and whereas now, in Bali, I'm making a tiny fraction of what I used to make. But I have a very nice. I'm able to support a family of 4, and I have my own house, my own car, and I don't need anything else. I mean, maybe okay, in US, maybe I can afford to go on more vacation, but really I didn't have enough vacation time to do that. But here, I'm very content, very happy in terms of affordability. I mean, there's no comparisons. Southeast Asia, great food, great price, and that's why I'm not leaving. I'm not returning back to US. I'm putting my roots in Bali here. This is my island now.
Yes, and we are both people that have had the experience of living in both places, and this is the decision that we've decided to make, and it seems to me such an obvious decision. My wife's family, they're not rich people, but her father owns a house, her sister owns a house, they have cars, they have everything that they need, they live very comfortable lives. When they get sick, they can go to the hospital and they get treated right away. They're not on long waiting lists to get basic treatment. They get it right away. And even if the hospital you registered at, for some reason, there's some kind of hang up, you go to another one, you could afford to pay for it out of pocket. And that's what society should be. It should be a place where everybody can live together and have a comfortable life. It should not be this zero-sum competition where there's winners and losers, and the losers are always teetering at the edge. And this is kind of an extension of the system China has. China has a system like this. There's the concept of common prosperity built into their legal system. Companies have to serve a purpose. They cannot just pursue profit blindly. And you see a lot of this there's a mix. Like, the economies aren't purely capitalist, they're not purely communist. There's a mix, and it's very practical, and it reflects that. I'm not saying there's not corruption, there's not bad things happening. Of course there are, but the basic idea is that society should serve everybody living in it, not just a small handful. Of course, there's a handful of people who are extremely wealthy and well off, but everyone else can live a very comfortable life. So it's very important to constantly harp on that and show people there is an alternative system. It is being used in many places around the world, and life is demonstrably better, visibly better. You can see it every single day in your life. Now let's move more toward, and you were talking about so let's talk about the United States, which is on the other side. If you have a globe, you're Southeast Asia, you have to turn the globe 180 degrees around. It's literally on the other side of the planet. And yet the US is so deeply involved here in this region. And as you say, Carl, they have no alternative to offer. They say, you can't do business with China. You're not going to do business with China. We will ruin you we will burn your country to the ground. They're burning Myanmar to the ground right now, as a matter of fact. Here in Thailand, we talked about all the good things. In 2009 and 2010, there was horrible violence in Bangkok. There were militants with war weapons backed by the U.S. fighting soldiers. Could you imagine that, Carl? RPGs and AK-47s in these places where you shop. And people look it up. There's videos on YouTube of, because then they lit everything on fire as they were retreating from the U.S. From the Thai soldiers who were trying to get it back under control. It was horrific, and this was all U.S. backed. It's the color revolution model that they were trying to use here, because they could see this happening. They could see the whole region working out from under U.S. hegemony and working closer and closer with the rising China. And so just for an example, the high-speed rail line is under construction right now here in Thailand. They have a new central station separate from the current central station. And that's where the high-speed rail line will run out of, from Bangkok to up north to Laos, as you mentioned. And you could already see the elevated line in some places already well underway. The US-backed political party led by this billionaire, well, he's not a billionaire, his mommy is a billionaire, and he's just the son. And he was talking about, we need to stop, we're too close to China. We need to be closer to the US, Europe, and Japan. And instead of wasting our money on this horrible high-speed rail line, which moves billions of people every year in China, we should invest in the Hyperloop. I don't know if people even remember the Hyperloop. And he went to Nevada. He has this video on his political party's YouTube channel of him looking at this rink-a-dink toy, basically, not even a real prototype. And then he came back and he did this big, long presentation in Thai about how great it would be, and how this is going to catapult Thailand head and shoulders above everyone else who's too dumb to work with the US. They're too busy working with China. And then what happened? That whole project got closed down and went absolutely nowhere. It didn't move a single passenger anywhere in any actual capacity. And now Thailand continues on the path with the high-speed rail line that will connect with the rest of China. And what does that tell you? What does that little story tell you? It tells you the US has artificial alternatives just to sell something to the people, to get them on board, sell them this fantasy that they know will never materialize. And what they're actually offering is nothing. They're offering you stagnation, destitution. And we always talk about this, Carl, and this is, and then I will let you talk about where you think US-China tensions are right now, especially this tug of war over Southeast Asia. They want to dominate the world. This whole tariff plan was encapsulated in Project 2025. The chapter was written by Peter Navarro, who's now in the Trump administration overseeing it. And the opening sentence is not about, we need to make America great, we need to reindustrialize America. The first sentence is about how the US is the dominant superpower and needs to remain the dominant superpower, and we have to stop China from taking our place. And so that's what this is all about. And how do you exercise dominion over the rest of the world when you're only 4.5% of the global population? You don't do it by outcompeting everyone. That is impossible. You do it by dividing and destroying everyone else and ruling over the rubble. So Carl, where do you see, maybe we'll just put this up on the screen real quick. This one right here. So CNBC News, Trump officials Besant and Greer to meet with Chinese counterparts on trade, economic issues. So this is May 6, 2025. And Greer is the U.S. trade representative. And in his testimony in front of the Senate during his confirmation hearing, all he talked about was the U.S. needs to implement policies that will enable American domination over China. Where do you see all of this right now, and where do you think it's going to go, Carl?
Yeah, I think Jeffrey Sachs gave a talk recently to Indian media. He basically said, United States hate China, not because of anything China done to US in particular, but because China is successful. China is successful without, following the Washington model, without towing the line. And the fact that China has the level of China's success now challenged Washington's dominant position all across the field in AI, in technology, and in economy, and that's not acceptable. That's really what you just said about Peter Navarro. It's all about maintaining American dominance, American hegemony, and this is a real reason they try to bring China down. But they're doing this through really stupid way. This Trump tariff. I mean, Trump just gave a talk recently to a news conference. He said, "Well, China, they take advantage of us. Like they take everything from us in our trade. They have a $1 trillion trade surplus. They're taking $1 trillion away from us." I feel the same way about grocery store, right? Every time I buy so many stuff from the grocery store, they never buy anything from me. It's so unfair. And then Trump goes on to say, you know what? Now with the tariff of 145%, there's no business, of course, because it's a ridiculously high tariff. So there's no business. But you know what? It's not a bad thing, because that means that we're not spending that $1.1 trillion. We're saving that $1 trillion. So in fact, you can say we're making $1 trillion. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I really want that BYD supercar, the Yangwang U9 that costs $250,000. But I decided today that I'm not gonna have that car, so I'm actually making $250,000 today, guys. I mean, this is the level of economic sophistication we're dealing with here, folks. And so the whole tariff thing is a big joke, and it actually pushed country toward China. I mean, one of the big impetus to push, particularly, I mean, the South ASEAN was already aligned with China anyway, but you push Korea and Japan into China's arm. Now it's not just China and ASEAN agreeing to a free trade zone. It's China, Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN. And for Japan, they actually the first to say no to United States. They said, no, we will not sign up on any anti-China trade bloc because our relationship with Beijing is too important. This is Japan, a militarily occupied country that had traditionally always been to the U.S. demand. If Japan can say no to United States, that means no country is going to go along with the Trump plan. And Japan, because for Japan, the issue is existential. Trump slapped the auto tariff, 25% auto tariff on all foreign cars and foreign parts, and that's going to kill all the Japanese, Korean, and German automakers in U.S. You'll benefit Elon Musk because under the provision, if you have 85% of the parts made in U.S., then you are exempt from that tariff. And it just so happened Tesla factories in U.S. just fall under that 85% parts made in U.S. So Elon Musk is the biggest beneficiary of this auto tariff. But Japan recognizes this is an existential issue, so they rather align with China now, on this issue than accept another, basically Plaza Accord 2.0 getting imposed on them. And in a way, Trump is a great peacemaker, folks. Trump has managed to bring the East Asia together. He's a great peacemaker for East Asia, and we're seeing that with Europe too now. EU and China just announced that they're in the talks to get rid of all the mutual trade restrictions. And this is the EU that imposed a lot of sanctions on China. First in the Trump first term, and then through Biden's term, and now because of all the tariff Trump threatened them with, they decided, we better work with China. So Trump is helping, guys. Trust the plan. Trump. This is in the Chinese internet. There's a meme that Trump is actually the nation builder, right? The nation being China. The Trump is actually a secret Chinese agent working to further the Chinese interests. It started as a joke, but if you actually look at how things unfold, I start to see logic of that. I mean, Trump is making China great again.
Yes. Absolutely. And the pretext the U.S. is using to pressure Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, even the Philippines specifically, because they have been really pulled into the U.S. orbit, and they kind of always have been, is that they're helping protect this region from China, which they portray as some kind of bully. And this goes for the whole status of Taiwan, which is actually part of China, even according to the U.S. and its agreements with China and under international law. The U.S. is always depicting this as we're here to defend Taiwan. But when you actually look at the policies, these policies are devastating all of these countries. Taiwan is an island province, devastating the local economy there. Japan and South Korea, the semiconductor industry, they have facilities inside China that are instrumental to their business. And the U.S. is trying to force them to sign agreements that would cancel all of this cooperation, force them to pivot toward the United States. And just like we were talking about Thailand and the high-speed rail that China is offering, and the non-existent science fiction Hyperloop that was the U.S. alternative, this is what the U.S. is offering everybody. They don't have alternatives. And it is the U.S. which is actually threatening and undermining the peace, the prosperity, and stability of all of these countries. And we can already see what has happened in Europe. The European countries themselves, Ukraine specifically, what happens when the U.S. is able to exercise political control over these nations, override their own sense of self-preservation, their own best interests, and push them into a conflict that makes absolutely no sense any other way. And this is what I'm worried about is going to happen here in Asia. Yes, Japan and South Korea, they're speaking up to a certain extent. There's special interests in both of these countries that are losing because of U.S. coercion. But that was the case in Europe prior to 2014, when the U.S. really cracked down on Europe. They bent and they went along with it. Is that going to happen with Japan, South Korea, the island province of Taiwan? The Philippines seem determined. I was just looking at this. This is the island. This is the island province of Taiwan. Exports from the island province of Taiwan to the rest of China and Hong Kong. Obviously, you count them together as such a huge part of their export market. And then even in terms of imports, such a huge percentage is coming from the rest of China. And these are essential inputs for their semiconductor and electrical component industry. What about, this is the Philippines. Again, China, Hong Kong, if you put it together, much larger than the exports sent to the United States. These are export markets the U.S. cannot offer alternatives for. Thailand, again, same as kind of, if you count China and Hong Kong together, is almost comparable. But then when you look at imports, when we say imports, people act as if, well, you're importing all this stuff from China, so you're losing out on this. These are things that are coming in and propping up small businesses that are making a living for people. My wife has her own business, and she depends on importing goods and components and all kinds of stuff from China. And without that abundance, the overcapacity that the U.S. is complaining about, she wouldn't be able to make a living doing that business. And then
and local manufacturing too, because they often need to import machine tools from China for their own local manufacturing. So to start your, this is what the Apple transition to India is about to find out, because when they're trying to shift more production of iPhone to India, they realize they need to bring Chinese machines, Chinese components to supply the new Foxconn factories in India. So you still need the inputs from China. And for Philippines, in case of Philippines, even the Philippines, now you can buy the most affordable EV by BYD. The BYD Seagull, which sells only for like $9,000 to $12,000 in China. Now you can get them in the Philippines. A little bit more expensive, probably accounting for tariff and taxes, whatever. You can get in the Philippines for $16,000, which is still very reasonable, very affordable. But you will not be able to get in the United States, folks. You will never get the You will not get the BYDC go in US. But even in the Philippines, they can buy it now, which made me jealous because it's not even available in Bali yet. They're only gonna bring in maybe later this year or early next year. So all these economies are very intricately tied with China. Even Philippines under the current administration that's trying to pivot toward United States, because US is really not offering it's not really offering anything, any alternative to the Chinese investment. Speaking of Taiwan, United States is wrecking the Taiwan economy. What they're doing, TSMC, their largest customer was mainland China. Like 60% of their exports goes to mainland China to supply. So they supply chips or make chips for companies like Huawei. And US said, no, you can't do that anymore. And US want TSMC instead to put a lot of investment to open up plants in Arizona. And now Trump administration want them to form a joint venture with Intel because Intel is in trouble. With their new chip manufacturing. So they want TSMC to share their trade secret with Intel, right? US often, when they talk about China, they often talk about stealing IP, forced technological transfer. Guess what? So they apparently just thought, okay, this is what we need to do to save Intel, is to force TSMC to share their secret with Intel, so Intel can come back. But TSMC is one of the main pillar of the Taiwan economy, and they are basically hollowing out Taiwan. At the same time, Taiwan just got hit with a 10% tariff, and while there's still 90% days extension on the bigger tariff, right now there's a flat 10% tariff on all export out of Taiwan, including their chips, and Taiwan dollar is now forced to gain value versus Dow. So they want the Taiwan dollar to appreciate in value. So right now there's a sharp rise in the Taiwan dollar. So all the Taiwan businesses are getting hit with a double whammy. First they're getting hit with a 10% tariff, and now they're facing with a rising Taiwan dollar versus US. By the way, this is exactly what happened to Japan in the 1980s. Japan was leading in semiconductor industry in the 1980s, and then US decided they can't have that, so they took to sanction the Japanese semiconductor industry, and they took a hammer to the Japanese economy by forcing the Plaza Accord on Japan, which forced Japan to revalue its currency to revalue its currency. But in such a way to appreciate their currency so fast against the US dollar, not only made the Japanese manufacturing less competitive, but it also, because the Japanese dollar is worth more now, it encouraged financialization of the Japanese economy. So all the money, rather than going to manufacturing and for export like what they used to do, all the money went to stock market and real estate. That blew up the Japanese asset bubble that eventually blew up in the 1990s, which Japan is still recovering from. And this is what China sees. This is how China sees what US is trying to do right now via tariff, which I think Chinese foreign ministry of all places output a video which call it out. That's what US is trying to do, is trying to pose a Plaza Accord 2.0 on the rest of the world, but particularly China, in order to slow down China's progress. And and China would not stand for that. I think the video is called "Never Kneel Down," and it says China will never kneel down to these unilateral American demand for China to cripple China's progress. And so, China is very aware of the dynamic, but places like Taiwan, they don't have much choice because they don't really have sovereignty. They don't really have autonomy, and a lot of the people in the U.S. they talk about Taiwan independence. Taiwan independence. Independence from what? Right now, Taiwan is subservient to the U.S. capital and to Washington. If anything, they need independence from Washington. They can't say no when U.S. make their demands on their or the crown jewel of the Taiwan industry, TSMC, and they can't say no when U.S. want them to appreciate the Taiwan dollar. And so their economy is going to face huge problems. This is why recently there's huge protests on the island of Taiwan against its current sitting government, and hundreds of thousands of people attended. You will never see coverage in the Western news media about this, but of course, most Americans can't even tell the difference between Taiwan and Thailand anyway. It's not like they care, Like the only reason anytime Taiwan even appear on the headline is to pose, we gotta defend Taiwan from China because China is so aggressive.
Yeah. So I've had a lot of people ask me how things are going in Taiwan. I said I have to check the news. I have no idea because I live in Thailand. What's completely insane is that U.S. policy papers, and I know, Carl, you've seen people talk about this publicly. They have made U.S. officials have made public comments about how in any conflict the U.S. provokes with China over Taiwan, the semiconductor industry will be destroyed. And if China doesn't destroy it themselves, they will destroy it to deny China these facilities. And so what are they doing when they get a Taiwan-based semiconductor facility transplanted to the U.S.? It's because they know they're going to Ukraine, Taiwan. They know they're going to do it. They're going to erase the whole surface of the island province, and they're going to keep the crown. They're stealing the crown jewels before they burn everything to the ground. It's so obvious what they're doing. People on Taiwan are going along with it. At least some people are going along with it, which goes to show you the power of political control and coercion over just a sense of self-preservation. There will be no Taiwan if the U.S. gets its way, just like there is increasingly no Ukraine. Now, Carl, I've heard you talk about this. I think it was our conversation with Danny Haifang. Excellent conversation. And we were talking about the U.S. building factories and how it takes years to build a factory and get it operational. But it's not just about building factories. China doesn't just have a bunch of factories. They have factories, they have supply chains, they have networks. Manufacturers are all working together. There's synergy between all of that. This is something else that we've always brought up. This is from 2017, and I assure you that it hasn't improved in America's favor. Since then, they're talking about science, technology, engineering, mathematics graduates per country. I'm going to show you a bigger picture of this. That's China right there, 4.7 million every year. This is the United States. The United States has a larger population than Russia, but they have a comparable number of STEM graduates. So it's not even about, well, they just have more people. There's a higher rate of STEM graduation in China per capita than in the United States. And we always hear about China stealing all of our ideas. There's no possible way for Asian people to be as smart as us. They're coming up with technology that's as good or better. Somehow they stole it from us. Even when it's better, somehow they still make the argument that it was stolen from them, kind of like President Trump accusing Russia of stealing hypersonic missile technology. Did they physically steal the working hypersonic missiles, and that's why the U.S. doesn't have any working?
Doesn't have it. That's why U.S. doesn't have it. Also, U.S. don't have 5G because China stole it. Huawei stole it. Because the way I came to United States is because my dad was the first generation post-cultural revolution students, Chinese students that came from China to study in the U.S. He came in 1985 to study for PhD in University of Illinois. So I remember when I came to US in the early 90s, I went to visit my dad in the University of Illinois research lab. And I'm looking around like, it's all Chinese. It's all Chinese grad students, right? And like people don't realize how dependent American scientific research is dependent on immigrant labor, but particularly Chinese grad students. And but this is not to say Americans are dumb or anything, because United States has done well before even many decades before. But this is because I work in IT, so I know how this dynamic works. All the smart people in the US, they went to straight to the finance because that's where the money is. You are not financially rewarded by grinding in a lab. Those are for the underpaid Chinese grad students. This is why it's the immigrants, the Chinese, the Indians, the Iranians, the Russians who are grinding away in the labs. All the native born Americans, they just go straight to work in the Wall Street because that's where the money is made. Because the way the whole incentive in the society is set up, so not to encourage bright people to go into science, go into STEM. But for the immigrants, they just don't have the choice, so they have to. But this is rather than fixing this problem, improving education, improving incentive, to fix the American problem, it's going to take a huge structural change. They're going to have to, they're going to cut this Wall Street pay and shift it to pay engineers and scientists. That's not going to happen. When Trump's right hand man, like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he worked for George Soros. Right, and then you have the Commerce Secretary Lutnick. He was a Wall Street guy. These are the same guys that offsource jobs from offshore U.S. manufacturing to East Asia in the last 4 decades, and now they're the same people that claim they're going to bring the jobs back. I mean, come on, how you have to be pretty gullible to believe that. It's never about bringing manufacturing back home. And it's just, as you saw what happened with Apple. They just say, okay, we'll just shift enough production to India. How is that a win for United States? How is that bringing job back to United States? They just move it from China to India, and then all the Americans get made in India iPhone. That's it. How is that a win? But this is how. Oh, by the way, in terms of chip sanctions. So the chip sanction on U.S. chip sanction on Chinese chip company was very broad, so that any Chinese U.S. companies cannot buy chips that's made in China, which meant they're not just talking about U.S. companies in the U.S. For example, GM and Ford, they have factories in China making cars. Up to 2023, GM was making more cars in China than they make in America. Under the Biden chip sanctions, GM and Ford factories in China, they're not allowed to buy chips made in China to be used in the cars that's manufactured in their Chinese factory for Chinese consumers. I mean, that's how broad this kind of chip sanction was. It's not even impacting American consumers. This is to screw the Chinese consumers. Like, you know what? You can't get Chinese chip in your Ford and GM cars anymore. And this is also this is also one of the reasons American business are getting squeezed out of China by these stupid American policies. There's when Trump is talking about $1 trillion trade surplus, he's looking at it from like a 19th century mercantilist point of view. Like, because back then it's very easy to look at the trade figures. You just look at import versus export. But today, because the economy is so intertwined, Apple, they make $60 billion of revenue in China $70 billion of revenue in China every year consistently. But these iPhones, they're made in China. They leave Chinese factory, go into the hands of Chinese consumers. They never go through custom. So that figure never get registered in the trade figures between US and China. But Apple is still getting lion's share of that profit. And that profit goes back to the Apple employees and their shareholders. And so really the problem in US is a distribution problem. It's because a lot of the multinationals, they were making money head over heels in China. But again, that money goes to the US 1%. This does not benefit the average Joe six-pack in United States. So that was a real problem. But really attacking it from that angle, they just try to blame everything in China, everything on China. Of course, China never went over to US and pointed a gun to the Wall Street executives and say, now move factories to China. That never happened. But here we are. It is what it is.
Yes, and it's interesting that it was this obsession with profit over everything else that drove U.S. manufacturing over to China in the first place. And now it's this obsession with profit and power. First, for whatever reason, Wall Street and Washington cannot accept a proportionate role among the other nations of the world. They insist on imposing themselves on all the nations of the world. And so the same mentality that created this problem in the first place is trying to guide America in a new direction to try to overcome this situation that has emerged where power is now becoming more equally distributed around the globe. And it is centered on China. And I constantly hear the United States talking about how we need to stop the rise of China. When you really think about it at face value, it makes no sense at all. China has a larger population, industrial base. We just looked at the STEM graduates, millions more every single year. Why shouldn't China be more powerful, wealthier, better developed than the United States? All of the factors, all the ingredients are there. So why is it a bad thing for China to rise? It would be like the British complaining about the United States overtaking them. It's little tiny islands. They had their time and now it's over and you need to accept reality. And if you keep bashing your head against the cement wall of reality, you're just going to end up hurting yourself over time. You're not ever going to break your way through that wall. But this is where the United States is right now as a country. And this is what I worry about. They obviously are not going to outcompete China. It's impossible for them. And I acknowledge that Americans are clever. They're hard work. There's plenty of hardworking, smart Americans. The problem that America has with this supremacist mentality is there's just so many more people in China who are also hardworking and just as capable. And when you, all other factors aside, whoever has the largest amount of human resources and have invested more in those resources, they will always have the advantage. China is demonstrably building a world order where it is not imposing hegemony on other nations. The only global superpower to rise without firing a single shot at anybody. This all took place during the 21st century. China has not gone to war with anyone during the 21st century because people always talk about last century and they had that scuffle with Vietnam, which had nothing to do with China's rise. This was unrelated. And that, again, that was last century. The people involved are all gone. So demonstrably, they're already proving that they are different. They have a different vision for the world than the United States and the US's European predecessors, the previous empires that have ruled over the rest of the world. So we're past 1 hour. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Carl? We got just a couple of questions that we can do. Is there any last topics you want to bring up relevant to this topic?
Well, I think people wanted us to talk a little bit about India and Pakistan.
That's right.
That's right. I'm actually surprised that there was actually kinetic action because traditionally in the past, Indian government and media usually they talk a big game and then nothing ever happens. So I was actually surprised now they actually apparently they bombed Pakistan-held Kashmir, and there's some aerial engagement. And there's a lot of unverified reports coming out, but looks like right now there were at least 3 Indian jets were shut down. The Pakistan side claimed 6 or more, but now we have Indian media acknowledging there were 3 jets down on the Indian side of the border. And I think from a lot of the open source intelligence we can gather right now, it looks like there are Indian jets and possibly Rafale. I think this is not unexpected because I think what India wanted to do is they kind of wanted to do what the U.S. does, which U.S. have an over reliance on air power because kind of the belief that we have more powerful technologies. This is kind of the same beliefs that led to Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. But what India tend to forget is that they're not the only one with the Air Force, and they are facing a peer competitor. As far as they don't want to recognize Pakistan as a peer competitor, because the Pakistan Air Force is actually quite experienced. The Pakistan traditionally they would send their pilots to fly for like Saudi Arabia, for UAE, for all these Gulf countries, and they had in the past a rack up of quite many actual combat experience. So I'm actually not surprised the India suffered a couple losses over their jet. Also, they are the Indian Air Force. They also have a procurement problem, because the Indian manufacturing base is not quite there yet. So they kind of have to rely on foreign imports for their military needs. And the way they have done their military procurement is they just buy what's available, which means buying from Europe, buying from Russia, and what ended up happening is that when you buy different type of aircraft, it's a whole, you need different parts. It's really hard to maintain, to have an effective system when you're trying to integrate all these different parts, moving parts into your Air Force. And so I'm sure like Indian pilots are great and experienced, but they are they suffer all these kind of physical handicap versus the Pakistan Air Force. They used to have just F-16s, and after that was held up by the U.S. They went to source their fighter jets from China. They have like the FC-17s, and then I think, do they have J-10s now? I'm not sure. I think they do, or they're in the talks of acquiring one. So I think in terms of Pakistan side, they're a little bit more streamlined in terms of their hardware, and they also have their Air Force have a lot of experience. But I think I don't think this is going to be a nuclear war. I don't think this is going to. I think this is going to be a limited engagement, and I think also India's side probably wanted to do like an aerial campaign, kind of shock and awe, and now Pakistan can also claim victory because they shut down couple jets. So this is my take, and back to you, Brian.
It's really hard to tell because Pakistan and India, this is a product of British imperialism, and the British really worked them over for generations. They've created deep-seated animosities within both of these countries and between both of these countries. It's all artificial, but over time, if you're able to artificially maintain it long enough, it becomes so deeply seated you can't talk. I've talked to people who are products of British imperialism, people in Myanmar, there's groups in Malaysia. You cannot talk to these people. They're not in reality. They have such deep hatred, irrational hatred. It blinds them again from even their own self-preservation. And you have to ask yourself, who benefits from any of this? Who benefits from getting BRICS to end up at war with itself, or a BRICS member being dragged into a war, even if it is by its own doing? Who benefits from this? And look at the territory they are fighting over. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor connects Pakistan to China through part of this Pakistani-held part of Kashmir. So who benefits from disrupting all of that? Probably the nation that's been trying to disrupt, cut off, and upend the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor since it was proposed. And that is the United States. They back militants in Baluchistan in the southwest, and I am almost certain that they're behind this. And there's terrorist groups operating in both countries. Who knows who's behind this? There's different factions within the military and political systems of both Pakistan and India. Some of them are realistic and committed to a different approach, a different possibility for the future with the multipolar world, and others are politically captured tools of U.S. hegemony. And so this is what you end up with, this completely irrational conflict that makes no sense, that no one is going to benefit from except U.S. hegemony. We have to keep a very close eye on all of this. I agree with you, Carl, about modern warfare. Pakistani Air Force aside, what about their air defenses? Yemen doesn't even have an air force. Look at what they have done to the United States. Their drones, their aircraft carrier. They've lost 2 F-18 warplanes now. One slid off the deck of a carrier because it was trying to evade a Yemeni either anti-shipping missile or drone, or maybe both. And now they had an accident, which happens. You're conducting combat operations. Everyone is more active than usual, and you're going to suffer more incidents than usual. So without having any sort of air force at all, Yemen has inflicted these losses directly or indirectly. So this is the reality. It does not pay to be a warmonger. This is, again, China has proven you can achieve superpower status, tremendous superlative growth and achievements without having to be a warmonger and stick your nose in everybody else's business. Instead of the U.S. learning from this, they are dead set against it, again, to their own detriment. Let's see. We had a semi-related question: Who is the weakest link in BRICS, India or Brazil? I will answer this, and then I want to hear your take on this, and then what I say. I think, yes, India and Brazil are both kind of weak links, and the problem is a lot of countries who are expressing interest in multipolarism and BRICS specifically. Again, you have to realize it's not one government with the same idea. Like, say here in Thailand, there is a genuine split. There is a US-backed faction, and there is a faction that is committed to Thailand's best interests. And even among that faction, there are people who are still, they have this romanticized view of the West. They don't really quite grasp how dangerous it really is. And so until you're able to protect your information space and uproot US interference within your political system, your media space, your education system, you're always going to be prone to be a weak link in any sort of multipolar project. This is India's problem. This is Brazil's problem. People say, why don't these countries just uproot US interference? Because there are consequences. The US will ramp it up. They will do drastic things. They will literally blow people up, blow things up. If you defy them, they will take it to the next level. And nations are afraid of this, and this is why they allow it to fester. But the longer it festers, the greater chance they have of upending everything ultimately. Like we saw in Bangladesh, they were playing that game, and ultimately they lost. Carl, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, countries in the BRICS like China and Russia, I think they much prefer India inside the BRICS than have India completely aligned with the United States. I mean, even if India is sometimes difficult to work with, but it's still better to have them, keep them close in the BRICS forum than have them be like a complete follower of the US. And so this is why BRICS. This is why BRICS includes India and Brazil. Again, BRICS is not, it's not a mirror image of the U.S. imperial system. BRICS. The whole idea of BRICS and multipolarity is you can have your differences and you can have your own sovereignty. You can preserve your own sovereignty without others telling you what to do. I think the Russia and China would prefer to keep engaged with India through the BRICS forum, but again, BRICS is also not a military alliance like NATO is. BRICS started as an economic forum. So right now, I mean, it's a place to. It's like. You always want to have an open channel of communication, and BRICS is such a place. And I think people, yeah, but in conclusion, I don't think the whole India-Pakistan conflict will blow up into a full-fledged like a nuclear exchange. It's far from that. I mean, I think India is doing things they wanted to show dominance. They want to appease. The Indian government want to show its own population they're doing something about the terror attack. There's a internet meme about JD Vance going to going to the Pope, and then Pope dies. He goes to India, and then there's a terror attack. But I mean, but the timing is suspicious, though. I mean, like it happens at a time when U.S. is trying really hard to woo India to its side. This is why we saw. Well, even then, I don't think India will, ever be kind of the pawn in the U.S. great game that envisioned by Washington, because India is its own ancient civilization. They have their own conception as themselves as a great power, rather than say like a vassal states. And India has its own priority. It acts certain way just because India thinks it can maximize the advantage by staying in the BRICS, while at the same time play footsie with Washington, for example. But this is because this is a calculated move by India. So I don't think the whole India-Pakistan conflict is gonna blow up more than it did. It doesn't. There's no reason to go to a full-scale war over this. India just want to show the world, but most importantly, the Indian public, that is doing something. It's doing something about the terror attack, and of course, Pakistan want to show that it's able to defend its sovereignty. I think after a couple bouts of this kinetic action, both sides will claim victory. India will claim that they have strike deep into Pakistan, and Pakistan said, "Oh, look, we shot down Indian jets," and the tension will continue likely, but I don't think there will be a wider war. This is just my educated guess on this matter.
I sincerely hope not, although I'm not going to try to predict anything. And we were just talking about how can the U.S. Maintain domination over a planet that is clearly, the playing field is leveled. They don't have this advantage in terms of technology or military or even economic power anymore. And we were just saying the best way for them to maintain hegemony over the planet is by dividing and conquering. What better way to do that than having two nations like India and Pakistan go at it against each other? So we have to be very, very, very careful about this. One last thought on BRICS and weak links within it. The further BRICS goes, and multipolarism in general, the further this goes, the deeper and wider it develops, the more space all of these nations will have to begin uprooting U.S. coercion and interference and political control within their countries. So it's something that countries need space to do. Thailand needs alternatives and partnerships and space to begin incrementally uprooting U.S. interference. Is so deep in all of these countries, people don't realize this. Here in Thailand, it's so deep. It's in every single university, every single media organization, with just a few exceptions. It's going to take time for people to build an awareness of this and to uproot it. And like I said, the U.S. isn't just going to let you do it without consequence. And so it will take time. People have to be very patient. You can't just say it's BRICS versus U.S. So India is the weak link because there's still U.S. interference and coercion and obedience even within India itself. It doesn't work like that. We're talking about incredibly complex. Just a nation itself is so complex, and then the world altogether is even more complex. So we have to be patient. And our job in the alternative media, and for people who watch, support, and help share information from the alternative media, this is our job: is to raise that level of awareness and help speed this process along as a bit of a catalyst. And I think that's it for the questions. We're almost to an hour and a half. I really want to thank you, Carl, for taking time out of your day to talk to me this morning here in Southeast Asia this morning. And everyone who is joining us from around the world. I saw Angelo in the comment section. I saw Danny Haifang in the comment section. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope to do this again, and I hope to have conversations with you, Carl, on other channels too, maybe back on Danny Haifang's channel. So again, thank you, everybody, and until next time, bye for now.
Bye-bye.